Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into the scented, sandstone-walled streets of 16th century Istanbul. The cobbles are still slick from a pre-dawn drizzle. Somewhere a sleepy cat curls tighter under a carved marble ledge, and a street vendor mutters as he adjusts his cart, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting into the misty air. And then it hits you another scent, darker, richer, earthier. Someone somewhere is brewing coffee, the kind of scent that nudges your brain out of fog and makes your spine stretch just a little straighter. But here's the twist, that warm, inviting aroma. In a few short years, it's going to be considered dangerous enough to get people beaten, spied on, or worse. Yup, welcome to the Ottoman Empire, where at one point sipping coffee could practically earn you a death sentence. You probably won't survive this episode, well, not without learning why your morning brew almost got erased from history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing when and where you're joining me from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the Grand Bazaar where the stalls are just beginning to stir. Lanterns sway in the half-light, catching flecks of gold-threaded fabric glinting off copper pots, and somewhere someone is humming off-key. Istanbul, or Constantinople if you prefer. Its pre-Ottoman name is already a beehive of voices, horseshoes, and the thump of spice sacks landing on wooden counters. But what catches your attention isn't the noise. It's the gathering at a small corner establishment. Men are seated shoulder to shoulder, their conversation low, but animated, their hands cradling small ceramic cups like secrets. You slip closer. There's no signage outside, just a small faded banner with what looks like a steaming cup drawn in charcoal. No one's eating. No one's rushing. The room is dim and smoky, lit only by a few hanging oil lamps and the glow of a brazier near the back. The scent is overwhelming, roasted, slightly burnt, but comforting. This is one of the first coffee houses in Istanbul. They're new, still strange, and already becoming something of a problem. The drink they're passing around came a long way from Ethiopia originally, but more recently from Yemen, where Sufi mystics used it to stay awake during long nights of prayer. The Ottomans, they picked it up in the Red Sea port of Mecca, where it had become both commerce and culture. Traders started bringing beans northward, dark, wrinkled little seeds that smelled like smoke and mystery. Now it's here in the veins of the empire's capital, and not everyone is thrilled. You take a seat. The cushion's thin, but the welcome is warm. The man next to you has a voice like gravel and a laugh like thunder. He's explaining something about the third cup, not the first, which wakes you up, or the second, which opens your mind, but the third, which makes you start whispering your real opinions. That, he says with a wink, is when the Sultan should start worrying. Historians still argue whether these early cafes were truly centers of rebellion or just a bunch of bored bureaucrats airing grievances between rounds of backgammon. But what's certain is that they were something new, something ungoverned, a place where people from different walks of life, scholars, merchants, soldiers, even dervishes, sat in equal slouch, debating poetry, politics, and whether the stars controlled your luck in the spice trade. And there's something deeply threatening about that, isn't there? The empire works best when everyone knows their place. But coffee makes you curious. It makes you talk. It makes you stay up late and ask questions you maybe shouldn't. One Ottoman chronicler described the early coffee houses as schools of the wise and meeting places of the intelligent. Another, less generously, called them dens of iniquity and idleness. You can practically see the future tension brewing alongside the beans. A stray cat brushes against your ankle. Someone laughs a little too loudly. You sip from a delicate porcelain cup. The coffee is strong, almost gritty, thick with sediment. There's no sugar, just the jolt and bitterness, but you already know you'll be back. The cup makes its rounds again. A man recites a verse from Rumi, someone else counters with a proverb, and the brazier pops. You can feel time stretch out here, fluid, heady, and dangerous, in the way quiet ideas are always dangerous. Outside, the muezzin begins the morning call to prayer. The coffee house empties slowly like steam slipping from a cracked lid. You rise too, stepping out into the gray light. But something's shifted. You feel just a little more alert, a little less willing to be pushed along by the flow. And just like that, the stage is set. Coffee is in Istanbul now, deep in its bones, and whether the sultans like it or not, it's about to reshape the empire one slow, sleepy sip at a time. You stroll deeper into the city, drawn by the scent of roasting beans and the distant murmur of early risers. The cobblestones are still slick from the morning mist, and the rooftops glisten under a sun that hasn't quite decided if it's going to shine or just loiter behind the clouds. And you, curious, alert, and already a little addicted, are about to follow coffee back to its tangled roots. The beans, small and unassuming as they are, didn't exactly stumble into Istanbul on their own. No, they were carried intentionally, repeatedly by merchants, sailors, and mystics moving northward from the mountains of Yemen. The port city of Mecca, yes, the name is no coincidence, was the epicenter. Traders would pack ship holds with bales of beans wrapped in cloth and dreams and set sail for the richer markets of the Ottoman Empire. You're on one of those ships now. Wooden, creaky, full of spices, wool, and men shouting over one another about docking fees and the best dates in Jeddah. The coffee travels tightly packed, but as the boat rocks gently on the Red Sea, it seems to hum quietly, like it knows its purpose. It's not just a commodity, it's a carrier of ideas. By the time it arrives at the port of Alexandria, coffee is no longer an oddity. It's something whispered about in scholarly circles, debated by clerics, and sold behind curtained stalls. In Cairo, the scholars of Al-Azhar sip it while studying scriptures deep into the night. One chronicler calls it the beverage of the pious, which sounds lovely until you realize that piety and political opinion often mix a little too well after midnight. Historians still debate whether the first true coffee house appeared in Mecca, Cairo, or Istanbul, but they agree on one thing: by the time coffee hits the Ottoman capital, it already carries a reputation. It's not wine, it's not water, it's something in between, allowed for now, but watched with suspicion. You stop by a merchant's stall. He offers you a handful of beans, hard, dry, dark as polished stone. You roll them between your fingers. They smell like burnt almonds and wet soil. He grins, displaying teeth as uneven as the empire's mood on any given day. Yemen's finest, he says. 2 handfuls for a silver piece. Brewed right, it keeps your tongue sharp and your boss worried. The humor hangs there just long enough to feel like a warning. You walk on, clutching your pouch of beans, imagining the hands that picked them. Most came from the highlands of Yemen, where the kahwa plant grew wild and stubborn on rocky cliffs. Local farmers, many of them Sufi Muslims, didn't just grow the stuff, they ritualized it. Coffee was part of their night-long dhikr ceremonies, where chanting and dancing were sustained by hot, bitter brews that refused to let anyone doze off mid-devotion. It makes sense, doesn't it? Coffee in its earliest form was spiritual. Not let's talk about our feelings spiritual, but stay awake and reach God spiritual. That same urgency, the idea that something so simple could jolt you into higher thought, made it irresistible to scholars and unsettling to rulers. Because here's the thing, the Ottoman sultans weren't scared of the drink itself. Not at first. They were scared of what happened when men gathered to drink it. You duck into another coffee house, this one slightly more upscale. The cushions are thicker, the lamps brass instead of tin. A storyteller is spinning a tale about Alexander the Great, punctuated by the rhythmic tap of his walking stick against the tiled floor. Every few beats, someone murmurs agreement or lets out a knowing chuckle. The coffee is served thick again, without sugar and with a side of candied apricots. You sip, then listen. And it hits you again, this isn't just a drink. It's a portal, a conversation starter, a defiant little bean that insists you sit down and think. You overhear one man whispering to another about a recent decree from the palace, something vague about gatherings being monitored. Another chimes in about a new rumor that coffee might soon be declared haram, forbidden by religious decree. You glance around. No one's panicking, they're used to it. They've heard it all before. But it doesn't make the threat any less real. Scholars and religious leaders were divided. Some argued that coffee was an intoxicant and thus forbidden. Others insisted it was no more harmful than dates or tea, both of which were perfectly acceptable. The dividing line wasn't about the drink. It was about control. Coffee kept people awake. Awake people had thoughts, and thoughts especially the kind that bloom after midnight, and a second cup have a way of turning into revolutions. A muezzin calls for prayer again, and the conversation hushes. Cups are emptied. Scarves are adjusted. You step back into the street, the noise of the coffee house fading behind you like the echo of a dream. The sun is climbing now, golden and patient. But there's tension in the air, like the city is waiting for something. A pronouncement, a crackdown, or maybe just the next shipment of beans. Either way, the coffee's here to stay, and the empire. It's about to discover that banning a beverage is harder than it sounds, especially when it tastes like revolution. You find yourself drifting toward another gathering, a quieter, dustier corner of the city where the pace slows and words settle into the air like lazy embers. The alleyway twists and narrows until it opens into a small courtyard, almost forgotten by time. This is one of the early coffee houses, unofficial, unlicensed, and entirely magnetic. The scent hits you first, not the roasted beans you've come to expect, but something deeper, anise clove and smoke, curling from a long-necked sesve buried in warm sand. The place is dim. Shadows cling to the arches, and the only light comes from a brazier that hisses softly as water boils. You step inside. No one looks up. Not because you're unwelcome, but because they're focused deep in a game of mancala or a slow-motion chess match, where each move seems philosophical. This place isn't loud. It isn't rowdy, but it hums. These are the first real Kava Canes public houses built for coffee and conversation. In theory, they're just places to sit and drink. In practice, they're doing something the empire doesn't quite know how to handle. They're creating free spaces. You sit. The bench is stone and chilled, but someone pushes a small cushion your way without a word. A cup is offered, no sugar still. Coffee here isn't sweet. It's honest. And as you sip, you listen. One man is reciting a bit of epic poetry, his voice so low it feels like it's coming from the walls. Another reads a letter aloud, something about trade routes shifting and the price of saffron dropping. There's a boy in the corner sketching rooftops in charcoal. Everyone has a cup. Everyone has an opinion. Here's the thing, in Ottoman society there were strict hierarchies. There were places where merchants sat, and places where imams preached, and places where women weren't expected to appear at all. But the coffee house disrupted that. Historians still argue whether these spaces were truly open to everyone or whether that's just a romantic gloss. But even at their most limited, they were radical in one very specific way: they democratized attention. In the coffee house, what you said mattered more than what you wore. If your story was good, you'd be listened to. If your verse was clever, someone would remember it. If your gossip was juicy, it would be halfway to the next neighborhood before your cup went cold. And in a world tightly wound by protocol and politics that mattered, you lean back, feeling the warmth of the cup seep into your hands. Someone's arguing lightly about astrology. Another man snorts at the mention of omens. Stars don't decide anything, he mutters. But the Sultan's moods, those are worth watching. It earns a laugh, and a few nervous glances. See, coffee houses weren't just cozy hideaways, they were perceived as breeding grounds for dissent. Not organized rebellion, mind you, just conversation. And when people talk freely, they tend to notice things, like how taxes keep climbing, or how a certain vizier has grown suspiciously wealthy, or why every new law seems to target someone different. In here, the empire is dissected slowly like a boiled bird being pulled apart by soft fingers and sharp minds. And outside, the authorities are taking notes. One traveler, an Italian merchant who wrote home breathlessly about Ottoman coffeehouses, called them universities for the poor. Not because they handed out degrees, but because they handed out perspective. For the price of a small cup, you could sit, listen, learn, and maybe change your mind about something. Quirky tidbit: some coffeehouses offered fortune-telling services using the grounds left at the bottom of the cup. Flip it, swirl it. Interpret the patterns. You might find love. You might find danger. You might just find a little hope. The Ottomans called this fail, and while not everyone believed in it, plenty paid for a peek into the possible. You peer into your own cup. Just grounds and grit. But you swirl it anyway, half expecting a tiny message to appear. Someone nearby quotes the poet Fuzuli. Without coffee, the soul is like a house with no window. A little dramatic, sure, but after your third cup, you're inclined to agree. You stand and stretch. Your limbs are slower, now relaxed, but electric, like your body's unsure whether to nap or start a revolution. The courtyard is growing crowded. More people are trickling in. Someone's brought a lute. Another brought dates. No one brought an invitation. This is what made the early coffee houses so powerful. Not the drink, not even the talk, but the spontaneity of it all. You step back outside and notice for the first time that someone is watching the door. Not obviously, not threateningly, just observing. Leaning against a wall, wearing the kind of bland expression that means I report directly to someone who doesn't like poetry after dark. The coffee houses are growing, and with them a quiet unease. And yet as you walk back through the alleys, your breath scented faintly with roasted bean and whispered heresy, you realize something: you'll be back. Everyone comes back. Because once you've tasted what it's like to think freely, you don't go back to silence. Your steps trace the uneven stones of the street as you drift back toward the city's pulse. It's late afternoon now, and the haze of smoke from hearths and braziers hangs like a worn shawl over Istanbul. You duck past a spice merchant grinding sumac, inhale the sweetness of dates piled like golden bricks, and then you hear it. A heated argument, not angry, but passionate. That unmistakable tone of two men trying to outwit one another with facts and flourishes punctuated by laughter and a slosh of liquid in tiny cups. You know the rhythm by now. It's the tempo of the coffee house. Inside, it's livelier than the last one, louder, brasher, filled with the kind of people who quote the Quran and bawdy poetry in the same breath. There's a scholar debating celestial spheres, a baker arguing that figs are more reliable than coins, and a very tired man trying to write a love letter while being heckled from two directions. You sit, you smile, you sip. But this time the vibe is different. There's a thread of anxiety woven beneath the conversation. A whisper, no, an echo of a decree that hasn't quite been spoken yet. You overhear rumors that coffee has caught the Sultan's eye, not in the good way. See, Sultan Murad IV isn't what you'd call a relaxed guy. He's young, sharp, and absolutely obsessed with order. Historians still debate whether his intensity was born of personal trauma he came to power during a deeply unstable period, or if he simply believed that a ruler's job was to discipline an empire into obedience. Regardless, he wasn't a fan of chaos, or night owls, or people talking too much over bitter drinks, and coffee houses. They were all of those things rolled into one fragrant bundle. This section of Istanbul, especially the Tahtakale quarter, has become the city's nervous system, its gossip hub, its complaint chorus. The government knows it, and it doesn't like it. Here's a quirky but true detail. The Grand Vizier at the time reportedly commissioned undercover agents dressed as merchants, barbers, even beggars to eavesdrop inside coffee houses. Their mission: listen, record, report. You start noticing them. A man sitting alone, never drinking, just watching. A pair pretending to argue over fishing nets, but clearly keeping track of who enters and exits. It's subtle, but chilling. Sultan Murad IV's paranoia isn't just theatrical, it's institutional. He's already cracked down on alcohol and tobacco. Coffee, it's next on the list. One scholar explains it this way: between sips, wine dulls the senses, but coffee sharpens them. And sometimes that's the more dangerous thing. He says it quietly, but the others nod. They know. Coffee makes you stay up too late. It makes you write things you'll regret in the morning. It makes you think you're clever enough to rewrite the world. And maybe you are. But that kind of thinking terrifies autocrats. Historians still argue whether Murad IV genuinely viewed coffee as a religious concern or whether it was merely political theater dressed in piety. Technically, there's no explicit ban on coffee in the Quran, but by stretching interpretations of intoxicants and citing the rowdiness of coffee houses, Murad's clerics managed to build a case. A flimsy one, but when you're holding the empire's sword, flimsy can be fatal. You step outside just as the sun sinks behind the minarets. The call to prayer rolls across the rooftops like thunder in silk. A group of boys rush past, chasing a kicked ball of bundled rags. But in the shadowed corner near the mosque gate, you spot something new, a wooden placard being nailed up. A decree. You don't need to read it to know what it says. The air's already changed. By the time you reach your lodging that night, the city is buzzing. The ban hasn't been formally announced yet, but everyone knows it's coming. Coffee is about to become contraband. Cafes are about to become criminal. And you're starting to understand just how hard it is to separate a drink from the ideas it brews. That night, as you lie in your narrow cot, listening to the distant clink of pottery being quietly boxed away, you think about how strange it is that something so small, so ordinary, can become a symbol of defiance. A cup, a bean, a conversation. And the most revolutionary thing of all, staying awake. The city wakes slower than usual the next morning. You rise with a feeling you can't quite name: anxiety, anticipation. Maybe it's just the lack of caffeine. Either way, something has shifted. It's in the way the shopkeepers pull up their shutters more cautiously, how conversations stall when passers-by draw near, how coffee houses normally bustling before sunrise sit shuttered and strangely quiet. You drift toward the square hands tucked in your sleeves, and there it is, the official decree, written in precise Ottoman script on thick parchment, pinned high on the imperial notice board like a warning bell. It says in short what everyone feared. By order of His Imperial Majesty Sultan Murad IV, the consumption of coffee is hereby forbidden. Violators will be punished in accordance with imperial law. God is merciful. His majesty is just. You stare at it a moment too long enough to attract a sidelong glance from the janissary nearby. He doesn't say anything, but you get the message. Move along. So you do. Down narrow streets where the aroma of roasting beans has vanished, replaced by the heavy scent of fish oil and market dust. You pass a man sweeping his doorstep with more force than necessary. His eyes flick toward the closed door behind him, a coffeehouse once alive with argument and laughter. Now it's just a memory behind wood. The ban is real, and it's not just a symbolic slap on the wrist. Murad Forter isn't known for subtlety. This is the man who once executed a man for breaking the no-wine law with a goblet of fermented plum juice. He rides through the city in disguise, they say, dressed as a commoner, eavesdropping and enforcing his decrees with terrifying immediacy. You imagine him now, tall, broad-shouldered eyes, sharp as the scimitar beneath his cloak. Murad doesn't tolerate disobedience. He doesn't delegate paranoia. He lives it. Historians still argue whether his late-night patrols were frequent or occasional, whether the stories of his personal executions are inflated or eerily accurate. But they agree on this: Murad IV ruled through fear. And coffee became fear's newest target. Why? Because of what it represented. It wasn't about caffeine. It wasn't about health. It wasn't even about religion, though that made a convenient excuse. It was about gatherings, ideas, laughter, late nights, the notion that somewhere out of sight, people might be thinking their own thoughts and not reciting the state's approved lines. You pause outside a closed cafe. The sign above the door has been removed, but you can still see its ghost Kavahane etched faintly in faded paint. You try the handle. Locked. Of course. But someone's watching from a window above. Just a flicker of a curtain, a glint of an eye. You nod. They don't nod back. You wonder about the owners. Where do they go now? What happens to all those tiny cups, those brass kettles, the jars of cardamom and cinnamon meant to sweeten the bitterness? Are they hidden, destroyed, sold to Europe where the ban doesn't bite? And what of the patrons? They're scattered now, their routines disrupted. Some will obey, some will wait, and some will resist. The crackdown is beginning in earnest. You see it in the increased patrols, in the warnings whispered between stalls, in the sudden scarcity of beans in the marketplace. Prices have doubled overnight, then tripled, and now they're just gone. But you also start to see signs of something else, tiny glimmers of defiance. A man pretending to sell spices who discreetly passes a small paper-wrapped bundle to a customer. A door cracked open, a little too long, the sound of ceramic clinking inside. A chimney puffing just a bit more fragrantly than it should. Coffee hasn't vanished. It's gone underground, and you feel caught in the middle, both witness and participant. Each step you take in this city feels like a footnote in a larger story, one where the lines between control and rebellion are written in steam. Quirky detail. Some clever vendors are rebranding coffee as dark barley soup or heated bean infusion. Technically, they're not lying, but even those euphemisms carry risk now. You walk home slower that evening, your steps weighed down by silence. The city feels different, less lively, less sharp, like someone turned the volume down on its spirit. But inside, in hidden corners and behind locked doors, the coffee is still brewing. Quietly, determinedly, as if to say you can ban the bean, but not the thought that comes with it. You wake in the stillness of a city pretending everything is normal. The sun cuts thin shadows across the stone walls. Vendors call out their prices as if nothing has changed. The mosque across the way echoes with morning prayers. But the difference is palpable. It's in the stiff shoulders of merchants who used to gossip freely, in the sudden scarcity of warm places to gather, in the way the air seems colder, less aromatic, like someone's stolen the scent right out of the day. Coffee is no longer public. It's whispered. You head to a part of the city you haven't explored before. Narrower alleys, older stones where the buildings seem to lean over you like gossipy grandmothers. It's here, tucked between a closed apothecary and a mosque under repair, that you spot a door with a symbol drawn in ash, a crescent incomplete. You knock. Nothing. Then a voice, flat and careful, you seeking heat or flavor, you answer the way someone hinted to you in the market, both but gently brewed. The door opens, not fully just enough for you to slip inside. Welcome to the underground. It's dim, not because it's night, but because everything here operates in shadow. The room smells like damp stone and cardamom. There's a brazier burning low near the back, and several men and one woman, to your surprise, sit silently around a worn wooden table. They sip slowly from plain ceramic cups. No silver, no ornament. Nothing to catch light or attention. This is how Istanbul drinks coffee now. No signage, no music, no debates too loud to draw notice. Only quiet, and cups, and the strange solidarity of shared secrecy. You're handed a cup without fanfare. It's hot, earthy, slightly bitter with a whisper of clove. You cradle it like contraband, and it occurs to you how quickly something ordinary becomes precious when it's forbidden. Historians still debate how widespread these underground cafes were. Some say they were rare, more rumor than reality. Others argue that for every shutdown Kavahan, 3 secret ones took its place. What's clear is this coffee didn't disappear. It just adapted. You learn the rhythm. Come in alone, speak little, listen much, leave with a clean cup and a full mind. Someone tells a story quietly in fragments of a man caught brewing at home, dragged from his doorway and beaten, not killed, just reminded. You shiver not from the cold, but from the knowledge that that could be anyone here. The Sultan's enforcers are creative. They don't just raid establishments. They watch chimneys, smell door cracks, listen for the unmistakable rhythm of ceramic tapping against stone. One report even mentions men trained to identify roasted coffee from over 100 paces, nose officers, if you will. You almost laugh. Almost. Quirky detail. Some households started adding fragrant herbs, mint, lavender, rose petals to their brewing pots, just to disguise the scent of coffee. It didn't always work, but it gave the illusion of safety. A floral alibi. One of the men at your table, an older gentleman with hands like folded maps, leans toward you. You ever taste silence, he asks. You blink. He nods toward his cup. This is silence boiled. That's why they hate it. It doesn't shout. It lingers. It teaches. And you realize he's right. Coffee doesn't roar. It simmers. You spend hours there not speaking much, just listening. The sound of quiet sips, the soft crackle of coals, the occasional muttered phrase, philosophy poetry, the price of black pepper rising again. No one stays long. Everyone leaves one at a time. Timing is careful. Routes are varied. Paranoia is the new etiquette. And yet, despite the fear, despite the risk, the place still fills. People still come. Because the thing Murad IV didn't understand, and maybe couldn't, is that coffee wasn't just a drink. It was a ritual, a rebellion in slow motion, a space where thoughts were fermented as carefully as beans. You slip out just before sunset, heart-thumping breath fogging in the chill air. No one follows. But every footstep sounds too loud. Every glance from a stranger feels weighted. Still, you can't help it, you feel awake. Not in the way a night's sleep repairs, but in the way truth does. Bitter, maybe, but clarifying. And even as the band tightens, even as the empire breathes down its own neck, you know one thing for certain: the coffee isn't gone. It's just gone quiet. You return the next day through a different alley. Your path twists past chicken coops, a donkey chewing quietly on turnips, and a fountain trickling beneath a fig tree that looks older than most city walls. Istanbul's bones are ancient, and you walk them with more caution now, every shadow a possible patrol. But you're not alone. Not really. The underground coffee houses are spreading, if not in number, then in spirit. In kitchens, in basements, in back rooms of bakeries that sell one too many loaves because the ovens hide more than dough. In tailors' shops where the stitching stops at noon and the curtains draw closed. You duck into a carpenter's workshop. He greets you with a nod, offers you a seat on a wood shaving-dusted stool, and pours from a copper pot that's still steaming. No words, just the pour, the sip, the quiet. This is the rhythm now hiding in plain sight. And with it, stories bloom. You hear about a group of scholars who disguise their coffee gatherings as Quran study sessions. About an old widow who brews coffee during her grandson's violin lessons, so the music masks the scent. About two lovers who send each other beans wrapped in silk, tiny coated bundles that smell like secrets. It's beautiful and fragile. Historians still argue whether this period was the height of repression or the golden age of subtle resistance. But it's clear every cup brewed now is an act of defiance. Not in the loud slogan-shouting way, but in the deeply Ottoman way, poetic, ironic, deeply aware. The crackdown, though, continues. Punishments become creative. Caught with beans, confiscation. Caught brewing, flogging. Caught serving, public humiliation, or worse. One story makes the rounds: a man tied to a column in the square, with a sign reading "The bitter taste of rebellion." No one speaks to him. But someone leaves a cup at his feet. Empty but symbolic. Another story, less poetic, involves a man found with a sack of green beans. He claims they're for soup. They weren't. He lost 3 fingers. You listen to these tales as you sip, not because you enjoy the drama, but because you need to know the lines. What's safe? What's pushing too far? Quirky tidbit. A few eccentric nobles begin experimenting with coffee art, not latte foam, mind you, but using thick grounds as paint to create landscapes and calligraphy that stain scrolls and walls. One even frames a portrait of Suleiman the Magnificent made entirely of pressed coffee sediment. It doesn't go over well with the palace. Still, these strange rebellions persist. Because something odd happens when you ban a ritual people didn't even realize they needed, they double down. You notice it in yourself. You now crave not just the drink, but the moment, the pause, the permission to think. And in this empire, thought is the most dangerous currency of all. One afternoon, you're invited wordlessly with a tap on the shoulder and a tilt of the head to a rooftop just before dusk. A makeshift gathering, carpets thrown across tiles, a low brazier burning beneath copper pots. Around you, a handful of people you've seen before, but never spoken to. No one introduces anyone, but as the first sips are taken, conversation flows like steam. Someone recites verses from Hafiz. Another quotes Aristotle mangled slightly but passionately. Someone tells a joke about a janissary, a dervish, and a goat that earns a full minute of muffled laughter. And there, beneath the setting sun, the coffee house is reborn. No walls, no signs, just people. You don't talk politics, not directly, but everything said has layers, Every toast is a protest. Every laugh a signal. The moon rises. The call to prayer echoes. Someone puts out the brazier with practiced speed. And one by one the guests leave in staggered silence. You descend last, stepping back onto the cobblestone like nothing happened. Like you weren't just part of something sacred. Because that's what it is now. Sacred. Not in a divine sense. In a human one. A slow, bitter sacrament shared in secret, held tightly between hands and hearts. And as the city exhales into darkness, you realize something simple and powerful. The empire can outlaw the drink. But not the ritual, not the connection, not the soul it warms. The morning after the rooftop gathering, you notice the silence first. The city is always noisy, carriages clattering over cobblestones, bakers hawking simmet gulls, screaming as if they've seen the future and aren't thrilled about it. But today the sound is thinner, less confident. You round the corner to your usual bread stall, and that's when you see him. A man bound at the wrists, seated on a low stool in the square. His clothes are neat, but his face is bruised. Around his neck, a placard scrawled in sharp ink, caught in the act, consuming the forbidden. The crowd doesn't jeer. They barely look. Because that's how fear works. It teaches you to unsee. But you can't help it. You look. And the man, his eye swollen, his hands choking, looks back. This is no villain. Just a man who had a cup at the wrong hour in the wrong place. Public punishment is in full swing now. Murad IV has moved past decrees and into performance. The empire isn't just banning coffee, it's making an example of it. People don't just disappear quietly anymore. They are paraded. The charge: moral decay, sedition, indulgence. The real crime: refusing to sleep when ordered. Historians still argue whether Murad's harshness came from real belief or political theater. Some say he genuinely saw coffee as a gateway to corruption. Others claim he used it as a convenient scapegoat to tighten control over an empire fraying at the edges. Either way, the punishments escalate. A rumor circulates a man caught boiling beans was sewn into a leather sack and thrown into the Bosphorus. Drowned in his own indulgence, someone whispers. You're not sure if it's true, but it doesn't need to be. The fear works either way. Another rumor, this one confirmed, tells of Murad himself, dressing as a commoner, wandering the streets at night, testing citizens. One wrong word, one suspicious smell, one visible stain of coffee grounds under a fingernail, and you'd vanish. A merchant tells you it's not the bean they hate, it's what we become after it. You sip more cautiously now. You carry dried orange peel in your satchel to mask the scent. You brew less, but you still brew. Because what they don't realize is punishment can make people pause, but it rarely makes them quit. In fact, the brutality has had the opposite effect. The coffee houses, those that still survive now, feel like temples. Sacred spaces defined not by volume but by commitment. Each person there knows the risk. Every cup lifted is a silent vow. Quirky detail: in some underground cafes, a signal system develops. If a patrol is nearby, a lute is played in a specific rhythm. If it's safe, someone sings a verse from an old folk ballad about rain. This becomes code. Poetry as warning. You learn the rhythms. You hum them to yourself when you walk. One day you pass a small cafe whose door is miraculously ajar. Inside, it's empty, abandoned mid-pour. The cups are still warm. A half-finished backgammon game rests on the floor. You don't need to ask what happened. They were raided. But what strikes you isn't the loss. It's the persistence. Because even in flight they brewed. They sat. They sipped. until they couldn't. The image stays with you, a place of community turned suddenly into a crime scene. And yet even with that haunting chill, you understand what drew them there. You'd have gone too. Because this isn't about a beverage anymore. It's about memory, belonging, autonomy. It's about the idea that you decide what goes in your cup, what words come from your lips, what thoughts form in your head. You walk slower now, not because you're scared, but because you're watching. For signs, for songs, for the faintest curl of smoke from behind a curtain. And when you see one, you smile. Because you know someone somewhere is brewing anyway. Tonight you walk beneath a moon so full it looks smug. The minarets cast long silver shadows, and your footsteps echo just a little too clearly. You hug the edges of alleyways out of habit now, not fear exactly, but something close, something cautious. You've heard the stories, but now you see it for yourself. A carriage rolls slowly down the main road. Not lavish. In fact, two plain mud-splattered wheels, no insignia. A soldier marches ahead of it, tapping the butt of his spear on the cobblestones. Behind him, three more. You duck into a tailor's stall, just as they pass, pretending to inspect buttons. The tailor doesn't acknowledge you. He just nods once, barely perceptible, and adjusts a bolt of cloth over the doorway, an old signal. Someone important is moving. And then you see him. The man stepping from the carriage wears the loose garb of a merchant, dusty robe, rough boots, but you know better. His walk is too confident, his eyes too sharp. There's a gleam at his side that the robe doesn't quite hide. It's him, Sultan Murad IV, in disguise, as rumor promised. He walks into the narrow lanes without entourage. Just a sword and the authority of a man who believes he alone holds the empire's spine in place. You follow, not closely, just enough to see where he goes. He enters a small shop. You recognize, a tea house that stayed carefully neutral, serving bland rosewater and little else since the ban. But tonight there's a flicker of brazier light behind the curtain. A scent. Faint but familiar. You hold your breath. Inside the room stills. You can't hear what's said, only feel the weight of it. Later you hear the aftermath. No blood, no arrests. Just a quiet announcement the next day that the tea house is closed for repair. But the owner gone. The boy who swept the floor limping. The brazier smashed. Historians still debate whether Murad personally conducted these raids, or whether he sent loyalists ahead, adopting the disguise afterward to reinforce the legend. Either way, the effect is the same fear grows a face with imperial eyes and calloused hands. This is no longer a philosophical disagreement over drinks. It's personal. Quirky tidbit. Some citizens began brewing fake coffee, a mix of roasted chickpeas, acorns, even burnt rice. It was legal. It was disgusting, but it let people hold a cup and pretend. Sometimes that was enough. But the real coffee that still flows underground, still warms hands and wakes minds in secret. You return to your usual hidden spot that evening. The staircase creaks more than it should. The coals are weaker, but the people are there, and their silence is thicker than usual. Someone finally speaks. They say he rides alone, that he tests us. Another nods. They say he drinks it himself, just to see how awake we really are. And that's the irony, isn't it? The Sultan, the enforcer, the executioner. He might also be the one who best understands coffee's power. He fears it precisely because he's tasted what it does, how it sharpens the mind, how it makes even the loyal question, how it keeps men up long enough to notice the cracks. You sip, not loudly, not triumphantly, just knowingly. Because in this quiet act, this simple raising of a cup, you carry something larger than a brew. You carry resistance, memory, identity. And while the Sultan can disguise himself, can walk among the shadows, can wield fear like a weapon, he cannot enter your thoughts. He cannot patrol your dreams. And when you sleep tonight, the taste still on your tongue, you'll know something he may never understand. You can't govern the heart of a ritual, and you can't kill a question once it's been asked. The days pass, and something strange begins to happen. Not louder, not bolder, but different. The underground gatherings don't just persist, they start to evolve. You notice it first in the faces. Younger ones, apprentices, students, the kind of people who probably shouldn't be risking imperial wrath, but do it anyway, because youth has always loved danger wrapped in ritual. They enter quietly, wide-eyed, trying to act older than their years. But by the third sip, they're quoting old proverbs and nodding like they've been doing this forever. It's spreading. Not fast, not loudly, but like moss, slow, stubborn, inevitable. Tonight, you're sitting in a candle-lit cellar with 9 others. No one speaks at first, just the soft sound of cups, clicking, the occasional cough, a bit of charcoal scratching out a verse on reused parchment. The conversation starts with poetry, Rumi, of course. Then someone shifts into satire. Then history. Then gossip. And then quite suddenly a shift. What if someone says slowly the ban ends, but the taste never returns the same? No one answers. But the idea lingers. Because it's not just about coffee anymore. It's about the version of yourself you only meet when you're holding that cup. Shoulders relaxed, thoughts sharp, surrounded by people who aren't family or co-workers, but something more elusive, fellow thinkers. And thinkers are dangerous. That's what the Empire is starting to realize. Or rather, fear. Historians still debate how effective Murad IV's bans truly were. Some argue they stifled dissent. Others point out that every crackdown only made coffeehouses more legendary, more essential. What's certain is, this no imperial edict can unboil a bean that's already shaped a generation. Tonight's group includes a spice merchant who brings rumors like he's delivering cinnamon. They're losing control, he whispers. Too many cups, too many quiet rooms. He grins, and it's the grin of someone who's realized fear only works until it doesn't. Someone else passes around a tiny pamphlet handwritten, smuggled from Damascus. It's a poem thin as onion skin and scented faintly of cloves. It praises the bean, the cup, and the truth that rises with steam. You memorize the last line, where thought is steeped, tyranny boils dry. Quirky detail. One secret cafe adopts the name The Whispering Pot, painted in lemon juice on the back of a curtain, invisible unless held near a flame. A small joke. A big message. You leave later than usual. The moon is thin now, a pale rind in the sky. The streets are wet from a recent drizzle, and your shoes slap more loudly than you'd like. Halfway home, a sound makes you pause. Footsteps. Measured. Purposeful. You quicken. So do they. You duck into a dark passage, heart thumping, breath tight. Every movement feels amplified. Every doorway a possible snare. And then, silence. Whoever was behind you is gone, or has stopped. You stand there, pressed against stone, still warm from the day's sun, and realize something odd. You're not afraid, because you know something they don't. They can chase bodies, but they'll never catch ideas. Not once they've bloomed. And with that quiet conviction warming you more than the night air, you walk the rest of the way home. A little slower. A little straighter. Like someone who carries something worth chasing. The sun rises late, or maybe you've just been waking earlier. Either way, the city feels different in the blue hush of dawn. Its walls pale and sweating with dew, the calls of early merchants softened by still sleeping windows. But your senses are sharper now. You notice more. like the faint curl of smoke rising from a chimney that shouldn't be lit, or the momentary pause of a stranger before they knock twice then once on a shuttered door. The rituals are coded now, but constant. This morning you visit a spice cellar officially to buy coriander. Unofficially, he's one of the quiet resistors. His hands smell of cumin, but his shelves hide packets of roasted beans sealed in beeswax and bundled with straw to mute their scent. He slides you one without a word. You nod. This is how it works now. Eye contact, subtle exchanges, loyalty and gestures too small for the empire to track, and then a ripple. News spreads not from the palace but from the docks. A foreign merchant ship has arrived from Venice. Onboard bundles of Ethiopian coffee marked not for trade but for gift, destined for a vizier's table. Legal technically, but only just, and more importantly, everyone knows. You hear it whispered in the market stalls. So they can sip in silver while we hide in cellars. It's the kind of hypocrisy that brews discontent even faster than coffee. Historians still argue whether this shipment was intentional provocation or quiet corruption. Some say Murad never knew. Others believe it was a calculated test to see how far loyalty would stretch when sweetened with power. Either way, it changes things. The band's absurdity has been laid bare. You feel it in the air, an almost giddy indignation. The kind that makes jokes sharper, eyes braver, people bolder. That night at a hidden cafe, a man stands and reads aloud a fake royal edict he's written by hand. In it, Murad IV declares that coffee is now holy water, brewed by angels, and must be consumed hourly for divine favor. The room bursts into muffled laughter. Not raucous, just enough to sting. Quirky tidbit, someone brings mock beans carved from olive pits and polished to resemble the real thing. Useless, but passed around like talismans. Tokens of defiance. You take one, hold it in your palm. It's smooth, absurd, and beautiful. A joke you can't arrest. But then the laughter fades, because someone new enters. Young, nervous, his robe too clean, his hands too still. A spy, maybe. The conversation stutters, dies. The brazier's heat feels sudden and risky. But then one of the elders, the spice merchant, offers him a cup anyway. The boy hesitates, then drinks, and just like that, the room breathes again. Because coffee's power isn't just in thought, it's in trust, in inclusion, in shared risk. And sometimes one sip is all it takes to flip a watcher into a witness. Later, as you step outside, a light rain begins to fall, gentle, rhythmic, almost like applause. The streets glisten, and your breath clouds the air in little puffs. And you know something's shifting. Not loudly, not yet, but undeniably. The empire may still hold the sword, but you hold the cup. And tonight, that feels like more than enough. The next morning, a gull screeches overhead with the self-importance of a tax collector, and you find yourself chuckling not because it's funny, but because it's the first real laugh you've allowed yourself in days. The tension, it turns out, can only stretch so far before it snaps into absurdity. You walk by the harbor where barrels of dates and bolts of Syrian silk are being offloaded. A sailor, soaking wet and missing half an eyebrow, hawks tales of a storm near Cyprus and how the ship's cat mutinied. You smile politely, then duck into a nearby alley where you know the real stories travel. Today, the whisper isn't about decrees. It's about Europe. Rumors say that traders from Venice and Marseille, those merchants who were once amused by Ottoman coffee rituals, are now obsessed. They're importing beans by the boatload, building cafes, mimicking Ottoman-style cups, low seating, even calling it Turkish coffee with a wink, as if branding can sanitize rebellion. And here's the kicker, some of the beans they brew came from Istanbul. Yes, the empire that tried to ban coffee is now exporting it indirectly, accidentally, and profitably. You walk into a cloth shop. The back room has been cleared of bolts and needles. Instead, it holds a small gathering. On the table, a map, ink, and a ledger marked with names. One of them, a merchant, smirks and says, "Apparently the French think bitter coffee means wisdom." Imagine that. Historians still argue whether this trade expansion was deliberate or merely the byproduct of black market abundance. Some claim certain Ottoman elites quietly invested in European café culture while enforcing bans at home. Others think it was poetic justice that the bean once chased underground simply took to water and floated west. You sit beside a weaver with trembling hands. She tells you how her brother was exiled for running a mobile coffee stand, nothing but a donkey, a brazier, and 2 copper cups. He now writes letters from Vienna where he's opened a cafe near the university. She passes you one of his notes. It reads, "They line up to drink what we were punished for. The empire that gagged my voice now perfumes theirs." Quirky tidbit. In London, someone begins mixing coffee with milk and calling it breakfast medicine. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, people are still ducking behind bakery ovens to sneak sips. The irony is almost too much to swallow. Back at the gathering, someone presents a new idea. If Europe loves it so much, let them have it. Sell it. Tax it. Let the West drink so deeply that the East's punishment becomes profit. You feel the room bristle not with agreement, but with recognition. Because coffee's not just a substance anymore. It's become a symbol of what the empire lost when it tried to control thought, and what Europe gains by embracing it awkwardly, greedily, but openly. You step out into the afternoon light and realize something both sobering and strange. The thing the Ottomans tried to erase is now their most successful export. They banned it. Europe branded it. And now it's global. The empire didn't kill coffee. It gave it wings. And here you are, watching it fly. The scent of roasted beans drifts across your path before you even see the door. It's coming from a bookbinder's shop, not the shop itself, but the narrow stairwell behind it, nearly invisible unless you already know it's there. You hesitate only for a second, then descend. Inside the room is warm, not just from the brazier, but from the atmosphere, soft lamplight, worn cushions, low murmurs. A cat sprawls across a pile of discarded pages, twitching in its sleep. And in the corner, an old man with a beard like frayed parchment pours 2 cups without asking who you are or what you've done to deserve it. You sit. He raises his cup. "To tea," he says, and winks. Because that's today's topic, coffee versus tea. It started quietly years ago. After the first crackdowns, some members of the Ottoman elite began leaning into tea culture. Subtly, then pointedly. Tea was warmer, sweeter, less suspicious. It didn't inspire midnight philosophy. It didn't smell like revolution. And so it became the safe drink. Now it's a cultural battleground, one where both beverages pretend not to notice each other, while each tries to outpour the other in influence. You sip. The coffee's thicker today, spiced with mastic and a pinch of something floral. The room buzzes with lazy energy. Someone's sketching designs for a teacup that looks suspiciously like a coffee demitasse. Another's reading a satirical letter from a devoted tea loyalist who claims coffee causes excessive thoughts and dreams of social justice. You laugh. Quietly. Everyone does. Historians still argue whether the rise of tea in the empire was a genuine shift or an imperial strategy. One theory suggests that tea was deliberately promoted by officials as a cultural replacement, an attempt to redirect the public's craving towards something more manageable. Another theory. Tea simply benefited from not being coffee. But either way, there's no denying the tension. At court, tea is served with ceremony glasses of golden liquid on silver trays, rose petals, tiny spoons. Elegant, contained, controlled. In cellars like this, coffee is still brewed over coals poured with a whisper and consumed with a look that says, "This is mine." Quirky tidbit. Some enterprising drinkers now host tastings pairing coffee with dried fruits and tea with honey-soaked pistachios, letting guests vote anonymously on which inspires better conversation. Coffee almost always wins. But tea is better at small talk. Someone passes around a tray of both. You sip each. The tea is soft, pleasant. It sits politely on your tongue and says nothing you don't already know. The coffee, it's bold, sharp. It whispers things like, what if you lean back, eyes closed, listening to the gentle hum of voices, the clink of spoons, the rustle of a robe as someone adjusts their seat? This is no longer about flavor, it's about philosophy. Coffee speaks of unrest and depth and late-night clarity. Tea offers comfort, tradition, and quiet approval. Both have their place. But only one was hunted, and that matters. Because the things we fight for, however small, however bitter, become sacred in the fight. The old man beside you, the one who toasted to tea, chuckles. They're both good, he says. But only one makes the world tilt just a little when you've had enough. And that's the truth, isn't it? Tea keeps you steady. Coffee dares you to tip. Tonight the wind has a different voice. It whistles through the narrow lanes, not like a warning, but like a memory, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. You wrap your cloak tighter, not for warmth, but because something is shifting again. The empire feels tense, but not sharp, like a bowstring that's finally lost its pull. You make your way to a home you've never visited, guided only by a chalk mark on a wall, a single dot above a curved line, the symbol of the steaming cup. Inside, the gathering is different. Older faces, quiet ones. Some you recognize from months ago, their beards longer, their eyes deeper. No one rushes to speak. No one needs to. The room holds a stillness that feels like reverence. And in the center, a pot. Wide, heavy, iron, not hidden, not disguised. They're brewing openly. You feel a chill and then a realization no one cares anymore. Not because the danger is gone, but because the fear no longer owns them. Someone hands you a cup. It's stronger than usual. Spiced. Intentional. There's no laughter tonight. No satire. No whispered jokes. Just a quiet, unified presence like everyone has shown up not to rebel, but to remember. A man begins to speak. Slowly. His voice rasps like a broom on old stone. The Sultan can strike down 10 men in a day, he says. But he cannot unmake a ritual once it's been born in the heart. He pauses. Sips. Empires fall, he adds. But the hand still knows how to pour. The others nod, not dramatically, just once, with the weight of people who have weathered many storms and now find themselves drifting into calm. Historians still debate whether the ban had officially softened by this point, whether enforcement waned because the palace grew tired or because the population simply stopped listening. Some point to Murad IV's own decline, his health failing, his focus shifting, his temper fraying. Others note that bans which cannot be enforced often erode themselves. But here in this room, you know the truth. The people made the decision for him. They simply kept pouring. Quirky tidbit. A popular ballad now circulates among younger drinkers set to the tune of a military march, but with lyrics praising the brew that burns the bean that binds. It's sung with irony and pride. You leave the gathering later than usual, stepping back into a city that seems softer somehow. The shutters are still closed, the patrols still march, but there's less tension in their steps, less urgency. Like even the enforcers know the tide has turned. You pass a small vendor with no sign, just 3 cups steaming on a low table, no menu, no words. You stop. He nods. You sit. And in that moment, under the quiet glow of a single lantern, you realize the war is over. Not with fanfare, not with surrender, but with silence, and the steady sound of cups being filled. Because sometimes history doesn't end in battles. It ends in routines, in rituals, in a sip that says we're still here. The morning breaks with no urgency, no banging boots on cobblestone, no shouted warnings. Just the slow unfurling of light over tiled rooftops and sleepy gulls drifting between the minarets. You walk through the city not like a fugitive, but like someone returning home. Coffee is everywhere now, not blaring, not bold, but present. Quiet stalls selling herbal infusions that everyone knows aren't. Copper pots on balconies, their steam curling into the air without apology. Cups passed across thresholds with no disguises, no codes, no fear, the ban still technically in place. But only on paper. And even the paper looks tired. What ended it exactly, historians argue. Some say it was Murad IV's death in 1640, his grip loosening with his final breath. Others say it was erosion, years of defiance, fatigue, and slow normalization. A government can chase rebels, but it can't outlast breakfast. You step into your favorite spot, the one beneath the fig tree where cushions sag, and the walls still carry traces of smoke. The room is full. Not loud, but alive. A storyteller recites tales of lost cities over the sound of bubbling sezvez. A woman paints delicate patterns on porcelain cups. A boy asks for the first time out loud what might happen if taxes were voluntary. No one gasps, someone chuckles, and someone else says, "You've been drinking too much again." And that right there is the final proof that coffee has won. Not because it brought down the empire, but because it became part of it. Quirky detail, one former enforcer, yes, one of the men who once shut down cafes, now runs a stall selling spiced blends. When asked if he feels hypocritical, he shrugs and says, "Turns out I like the taste of treason." You smile into your cup. It's hot, bitter, perfect. Across the room, someone proposes a toast, not to rebellion, not to history, just to the bean that made us listen. And as the laughter bubbles up, light, gentle, entirely human, you feel it settle deep in your bones. This was never about coffee. It was about pause, presence, reflection, about the stubborn joy of gathering in a world that wants you isolated, the quiet rebellion of curiosity, the absurd, beautiful act of asking questions when silence is easier. You step outside as the call to prayer echoes across the city. A breeze lifts the hem of your robe. A cat curls in the shade of a lantern. You exhale. Not because the story is over, but because you finally have time to savor it. And now, we slow. The noise of the city fades into the background, replaced by the soft hum of memory. Footsteps dissolve. Lanterns dim. And the last swirl of steam rises gently from your now empty cup. You sit for a moment longer, wrapped in stillness. There's something sacred about this pause, this space after the end of the tale where the heart rests and the mind floats. You let the story sink in, not as fact, but as flavor. A gentle bitterness laced with warmth. Think about how something as small as a bean-roasted ground steeped could stir empires, threaten rulers, inspire poetry, and survive the weight of centuries. How even today it brings strangers to the same table. Lets them speak. Lets them listen. You close your eyes. Breathe in the faint trace of roasted memory. Feel the comfort of shared ritual. Let your thoughts settle like coffee grounds in a quiet cup. You are safe here. The empire is gone, but the cup remains. And within it, the murmur of those who came before. Those who whispered, brood, resisted. Those who believed that staying awake, really awake, was worth the risk. Let that thought cradle you now. Let the night hold you gently. Sleep well, dream slow. And tomorrow, perhaps, you'll sip a little more thoughtfully.